Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into how a massive, unforgiving landscape forged one of the world's most critical geopolitical pivots. We're looking at a fascinating story of survival, transformation, and a really delicate balancing act on the global stage. Let's be honest for a second, how much do you actually know about the world's ninth largest country, right? It sits literally right at the physical and historical intersection of Europe and Asia, yet for a lot of us, it remains this massive blind spot on the map. All right, let's zoom out to the macro level. To give you a sense of the sheer, staggering scale we're talking about here, Kazakhstan covers over 2.7 million square kilometers. That is roughly 4 times the size of Texas. It's basically the size of all of Western Europe combined. We are talking about the largest landlocked country on the entire planet. So to unpack how this geopolitical giant came to be, we're going to follow a 5-part roadmap. We'll start with the Great Eurasian Steppe, move on to the nomads and the Silk Road, then look at empires, Tsars, and Soviets, cover their path to reclaiming independence, and finally look at their role today as a modern geopolitical pivot. All right, Part 1, the Great Eurasian Steppe, a landscape of extremes and strategic borders. The geography here is just wild. Kazakhstan borders 5 different countries. That includes a colossal, nearly 7,000-kilometer border with Russia, plus a hyper-strategic eastern border with China. And the terrain? It swings wildly from these dry, flat steppes right up to the towering Ural and Altai mountains. And beneath all that soil, incredible wealth. I mean, we're talking massive oil reserves, and it's actually one of the top producers of uranium in the world. So you can imagine this combination of strategic borders and deep resources has definitely caught the eye of some very powerful neighbors over the centuries. Which brings us to Part 2, nomads and the Silk Road. Life on the move across the endless white desert. You know, for centuries, this intense environment pretty much forced a very specific way of life, nomadic pastoralism. And this wasn't just a strategy to find food. It was a deeply ingrained culture, built entirely around surviving and thriving in harsh, unpredictable climates. This constant mobility really forged a resilient, totally unique Kazakh civilization, with a mindset completely tied to what they called the land of the endless steppe. But they definitely weren't isolated. The Great Silk Road actually turned this huge territory into a vital bridge connecting the rise of the East and the West. And these nomadic types, they were the ultimate facilitators. They handled large-scale trade, navigated complex diplomacy, and made incredible cultural and religious exchanges happen all across the Eurasian continent. So what happens is this nomadic strength eventually centralizes. Fast forward to the 15th century, right after the Golden Horde breaks apart, and we see the birth of the Kazakh Khanate. This was a seriously powerful, independent nomadic state. And at first, that wild geography we just talked about, those vast deserts and massive mountain ranges, served as an incredibly effective natural shield against outside invasions. But no shield lasts forever. Let's move to Part 3, Empires, Tars, and Soviets, the dark valleys of history. When you look at the timeline, it's just a relentless wave of external pressure. It kicks off with Genghis Khan and the massive Mongol conquest back in 1206. Then, jump ahead to the 1740s, and you've got Russian Cossack expansion pushing down from Siberia, building fortresses. By 1920, the whole territory gets swallowed up by the Soviet system as the Kazakh ASR. That ushers in a really brutal period of collectivization in the 1930s. And this overarching era of foreign control, it doesn't actually end until they finally declare independence in 1991. Now, the Soviet era specifically left behind a deeply complex dual legacy on the steppe. On one side of the ledger, you had this massive, rapid industrialization, the rollout of mechanized agriculture, and sweeping literacy programs. But on the flip side, the human toll was absolutely staggering. Forced collectivization completely tore apart the traditional nomadic lifestyle, causing devastating famines where millions of people perished. On top of that, the Soviet system actively suppressed the Kazakh language and tried to dismantle the traditional family-based clan structures that had defined their culture for literally centuries. 16,000. That is the number of categories of nuclear waste left behind by Soviet atomic testing, specifically in the Semipalatinsk area. To put that into perspective, it's a severe, multi-generational environmental disaster that the land and the people living there are quite literally still grappling with today. Which brings us to the modern era. Part 4, Reclaiming Independence, a peaceful emergence from a dissolved empire. So in December 1991, Kazakhstan is suddenly, almost unexpectedly, thrust into nationhood. And the reality on the ground was completely overwhelming. Literally overnight, they inherited this humongous territory, loads of Soviet-deployed resources, and a capable bureaucratic machine. But at the exact same time, they inherited an economy that had completely flatlined and an incredibly complex demographic puzzle. Just look at how stark that demographic mix was. By 1999, only a few years after independence, ethnic Kazakhs made up just over half the population, about 53.4%. Sitting right next to that was a massive 37.8% Russian population, plus Ukrainians, Uzbeks, Germans, and Tatars. Decades of Soviet dislocation and forced migration had essentially turned this brand new nation into a deeply transnational community. So figuring out how to forge a unified national identity out of all this, without sparking a civil war, was absolutely their most critical existential test. And that leads us right into our final section. Part 5, a modern geopolitical pivot, balancing the world's superpowers. So how exactly does a brand new, highly diverse, landlocked country actually survive? Well, through a pretty brilliant diplomatic survival strategy known as a multi-vectoral foreign policy. Basically, Kazakhstan flat out rejected the idea of falling under the exclusive control of Russia, China, or the West. Instead, they positioned themselves right in the middle. They advanced friendly, pragmatic partnerships with all of them simultaneously while throwing themselves into international organizations like the UN. They took what looked like a highly vulnerable geographic spot and flipped it into their greatest diplomatic advantage. And to legitimize this stance, they took some truly monumental steps on the world stage. Step 1. In a totally unprecedented move, they voluntarily gave up the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal, which they'd inherited from the Soviets. Step 2. They aggressively pushed toward a market economy through rapid privatization to kickstart foreign investment. And Step 3. They actively positioned the country as a neutral mediator, hosting venues for international peace dialogues. So why does all of this matter to you and me today? Because, quite simply, stability in Kazakhstan equals global stability. As a massive producer of oil and uranium, what happens in their domestic politics directly impacts global energy markets. Geographically, they are the absolute linchpin for modern East-West trade routes. And their strong, active stance on nuclear nonproliferation, it continues to set a hugely important precedent for global security. Now, obviously, it's not a finished project. Today, the nation is dealing with some very real challenges. They're navigating income inequality, managing sensitive political transitions, and trying to tackle severe environmental issues like water security and that nuclear fallout we talked about. But at the exact same time, they are going through this incredible cultural renaissance. There's a massive reawakening in literature, the arts, the ancient Dombra music, and the Kazakh language itself as the people really rediscover their roots outside the shadow of all those old empires. Which leaves us with one final thought. We've just watched a nation survive harsh extremes, devastating conquests, and the sudden jarring weight of independence. So how will a country forged in the crucible of the steppe and tested by so many empires ultimately shape the future of our global energy and geopolitics? Well, that is a story that is literally still being written. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the steppe.